he described it as a disgusting breach of trust. And it's really, really hard to articulate and describe accurately the level of shock, dismay and anger within government, not just among alumni of Gordon Brown's Number 10 operation, but everybody, that this could have possibly happened.
I am joined now by Rosamund Urwin, journalist for the Sunday Times. Hello, Ros.
Good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for being here. Look, as we've been hearing this morning, police are reviewing allegations that Lord Mandelson leaked sensitive Downing Street emails and inside information to Jeffrey Epstein, the convicted paedophile. Documents released by the US Department of Justice appear to show that while serving as business secretary in 2009, he shared market-sensitive government information on at least 4 occasions, information that was only known to a small number of people inside government. He, of course, resigned from the Labour Party on Sunday. He hasn't yet responded to those allegations. He's previously said he has no record or recollection of receiving money from Epstein. Katie Bowles, the Times' Washington editor, has spoken to Mandelson for an interview that you can read on thetimes.com. And she obviously conducted the bulk of that interview before these documents came to light, but she spoke to him again afterwards. And here she is talking to Kate and Stig on Times Radio Breakfast this morning.
He likens Epstein to muck that you can't really get off. And I think that really touches on the sense that this is a scandal that's much harder to shake off than some of his previous scandals where he has come back. Do I think, however, that he thinks that, his life in the public realm is completely over? I still think this is a man who feels as though he has things to say.
Ros, so as we said, the bulk of that interview was before the latest documents came to light. But it's pretty striking, isn't it? Mandelson does come across as a man who does still think there's a way back.
Yeah, he does. But, with some reason in that he's made it back so many times before. I looked down a list of all of his scandals before coming on. And they started when I was at school. And obviously they continued steadily over that period. He was first out of government in 1998 over that loan about the Notting Hill house from Geoffrey Robinson. It's funny, isn't it, that he says, I can't remember receiving this amount of money. Most of us would remember being given money by anyone, probably. But obviously the other people have given him far more. And obviously this went to his husband, this money. But it is extraordinary that he still thinks he has a path back. But he's been allowed back so many times and indulged. And, each of these, most of his scandals reflect a weakness in character to do with his attitude around money, and an absence of judgment that should be career-ending. I think I remember back after the 1998 scandal, there was a piece written when he came back the first time, probably in about 2001, where why are scandals, why don't they last longer in public life, right? So you could ask that repeatedly about his career, that, scandals that used to be career-ending, the point of this article was, over 20 years ago, they don't end your career anymore. Well, there has to come a point where you say there is no path back. I personally don't want to hear from him ever again.
Yeah, there are plenty of politicians who have faced scandals who do sort of exist in various points of the ecosphere. For example, being guests on podcasts, but actually coming back into government. I remember when he went back into government in when would it have been? When Gordon Brown brought him back, and it was just one of the most sensational, ridiculous things that had ever happened in British politics. Who could have thought it could happen again?
Well, exactly, and doesn't that tell us something about Starmer's judgment too?
The manner in which the story is being covered, Ros, I just wanted to check in with you on this. It's very hard to know how to balance the politics with, of course, the just really grim sexual story about women who were exploited and abused. There are millions of documents. The US Department of Justice isn't prosecuting anyone. Still, the only people who've been prosecuted are Epstein, who's dead, and Ghislaine Maxwell. This can't continue.
No, I don't think it can continue. I think it's interesting, isn't it, that we have to have millions of documents before women are listened to. These women have been shouting that this is what happened to them for over a decade, much longer than a decade. And isn't it terrible that this is what it takes for this sort of momentum behind it? I can't see how it can continue without a broader set of, at least people being looked at in depth.
Well, we'll come back to that later, I'm sure. Right now, let's talk a bit more about the politics, and let's bring in Patrick Maguire, the Times' chief political commentator. Hello, Patrick.
Good morning, Hugo.
Good morning. Thanks for being here. So, look, a cabinet minister during a financial crisis allegedly leaking confidential information to a mega-rich financier and convicted paedophile for good measure who had been personally bankrolling him. This feels like quite a big scandal.
It's probably, potentially, if the allegations are proven, on the face of it, it looks like one of the biggest crises, scandals about standards in public life, I don't know, since Profumo. It is sort of entirely without precedent, and that is one of the most extraordinary things about this. Look, Peter Mandelson's relationship with Jeffrey Epstein was a matter of public record even before he was appointed. to the US ambassadorship by Keir Starmer, the fact that that friendship had continued after Epstein's conviction in 2009. But I don't think anybody expected this latest tranche of documents to turn up something like this. And the most striking thing is just the frequency and depth of that communication, that it even extended to confidential internal government advice documents, market sensitive, that anybody working in finance would have killed to see. I thought it was interesting that Nick Macpherson, the former Treasury Permanent Secretary, said yesterday everybody knew, Alistair Darling knew, the Treasury knew in the banking crisis in the late noughties during the crash that the banks had an inside track to number 10, and in his words, nobody knew how brazen that inside track was. I spoke to Nick Butler, who was the author of one of the memos that was sent on the face of it by Mandelson to Epstein yesterday, and he said the whole point of working in number 10 is that you bounce ideas off each other. You write these things down for the benefit of the Prime Minister and your colleagues, particularly at a time of national crisis. And he described it as a disgusting breach of trust. And it's really, really hard to articulate and describe accurately the level of shock, dismay and anger within government, not just among alumni of Gordon Brown's number 10 operation, but everybody, that this could have possibly happened.
Do you mean to say that there are people now this week who were there in Downing Street at the time who are kind of like feeling like the scales falling from their eyes? They're going, that's how it was getting out. That's how people knew what was going on.
Well, that is certainly what Nick Macpherson is implying. And yeah, scales falling from the eyes is a good metaphor, because there are lots of people with reservations about Peter Mandelson, the Labour Party. That is not a controversial statement. Even if none of this had happened, that would still be the case. He's a divisive figure. He divided opinion within Gordon Brown's Downing Street. Gordon Brown sort of brought him back under sufferance, and everybody was pretty shocked that he'd done so, as you say, because of the nature of their long-standing rivalry, etc., etc. But even for a group of people with fairly low expectations of Peter Mandelson, the fact that the emails release seemed to suggest that this was happening, I think even people who are predisposed to think Peter Mandelson is not the best thing in British politics, are really, really taken aback by what they've seen.
Well, so Gordon Brown says he asked the Cabinet Secretary to investigate alleged leaks on the 10th of September, at which point Mandelson was ambassador, Starmer was still defending him. So who knew what when is going to be what this is all about. I want to ask you about Morgan McSweeney, because he's Keir Starmer's chief of staff. He was close to Mandelson. He's thought to have been the person who pushed for him to be appointed as ambassador. They were thought to speak a lot, and he was thought to have been key to the kind of sort of Labour resurgence before the last election. How damaged is he?
I think time will tell. Sorry, that is the thing I always try and not include in copy or say aloud, but it depends on how number 10 handle the next 48 hours. I can well see a very, very difficult day in Parliament for Keir Starmer and Morgan McSweeney tomorrow. You better believe that Kemi Badenoch will probably ask all 6 questions about who was giving the advice. There's a Tory opposition day debate tomorrow, which we can bet will involve some sort of vote on the Mandelson vetting advice. And you're right, Morgan McSweeney and Peter Mandelson were very close. Morgan McSweeney was instrumental in getting Peter Mandelson the job of US ambassador. Does what we've learnt this week necessarily change the calculation Labour MPs have already made? Look, I think ultimately there are lots of MPs who thought Morgan McSweeney was too close to Peter Mandelson, and that was one of the problems with this political project. It all comes back, however, to the Prime Minister's judgment. He is someone who didn't really know Peter Mandelson. Frankly, he didn't really like Peter Mandelson. That's when you speak to friends of the Prime Minister, they say he didn't really like or know Peter Mandelson. It was just that Peter Mandelson was so close to so many other people in this government that he came round to the idea of making that appointment. Why is Keir Starmer appointing someone who he isn't particularly well disposed to the most important job in international diplomacy this country has, if you already know that every other time he's been in government it hasn't ended particularly well? And if the Epstein thing is a matter of public record, that's a Keir Starmer problem. It's a symptom of Morgan McSweeney's closeness with him. But ultimately, what does it tell us about Keir Starmer that he made that appointment? It's that he outsources his political judgment to other people consistently. It's
like the definition of insanity, doing the same thing again and again and expecting different results. Ros, this is going to turn into a who knew what when story, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. We're heading that way, aren't we? And it's going to be interesting, particularly I think Starmer clearly is going to be scrutinised very heavily on when he had sort of an awareness about how bad this was and why he continued to defend him when, he could have cut that off a bit earlier.
Yeah, indeed. Well, Patrick Maguire is going to be back with me for PMQs Unpacked, which, as discussed, may well be a place where this might return in some sense. I'm fascinated, just before we move on, Patrick, I'm fascinated by that thing about Starmer not particularly knowing him nor particularly liking him. What is it that's going on with Starmer that he feels somehow in hock to these figures who he is associated with, tarnished by? Because he does have that whole, not just Mandelson, that whole Blair regime baggage, despite actually he would have been a pretty poor fit in the Blair government.
Who? Keir Starmer?
Yeah.
Well, look, I think it's because, frankly, people around him say it would be a good idea for you to speak to X, Y, Z. And there's a degree of knowing what he doesn't know as well, I think. But the relationship with Keir Starmer and Peter Mandelson was never close. Peter Mandelson used to send Keir Starmer emails that would never be replied to. And that is something, by the way, that's not just a Peter Mandelson thing. That is Labour people of a certain age feel like they want to get through to Keir Starmer but never can. You hear similar things about Tony Blair and Gordon Brown. Right, we're constantly trying to give this guy advice, which makes the Peter Mandelson ambassador appointment even more confounding in a sense that Keir Starmer didn't really show much deference or respect to these people. It's just that, he took advice, as he often does, that he wouldn't necessarily do himself. And this is the consequence.